In today's podcast, we're going to learn why the worst negotiator on your team is your proposal. Welcome to the Intentional Success Podcast, where we unpack the top strategies, explore business trends, and drill down into best practices to help your live events production business grow and scale on purpose. I'm your host, Tom Stimson. If you want to grow sales, and honestly, who doesn't want to, stop negotiating with yourself. When you say things like the client won't pay that much, or I need to be at this price, I can skip this step, I don't need to present the proposal in person, right? The buyer needs a proposal before they'll give me a budget. Oh, how many things have you said or have you heard said that is self-talk, right? And the self-talk replaces tested, reliable steps that lead to better deals with better buyers, okay? If you're using self-talk instead of process, then you're trying to do deals with bad buyers. So last week, I explained my 3-call process for closing better deals with awesome buyers. And I hope you listened, hope you took notes. Step 3 in that process was the proposal presentation meeting, right? And today I want to drill down into what goes into those proposals and some practical considerations about it. Now, there's a lot more things that can go into a proposal. I'm not getting into all of that. I really want to talk about the crux of the deal, the things that you've agreed upon in advance, and how that all ties together. Now, rule number 1 in sales. You may know what it is. What is rule number 1 in sales? Yes, that's it. Establish trust. Do you trust yourself? Look in the mirror. Do you trust yourself? Most of the proposals I see from event production sales folks are one-sided negotiations, which is a waste of both parties' times because the negotiation is between the proposal and the person who wrote the proposal, not the person who's going to buy it. So when you have not completely uncovered your buyer's budget and or tastes, you're going to end up negotiating with yourself because a proposal that doesn't reflect exactly what the customer wants, needs, and can afford will instead reflect your insecurities, your fears, and your concerns, right? And that's not a strong position, right? It's not a good look, as we say, right? Rule number 2, before you write a proposal, you need a baseline agreement, okay? Proposals are speculative. Agreements are things that have been pre-negotiated. Most of your proposal needs to be an agreement, okay? How do we get to that agreement? You follow the process. Listen to last week's podcast. So baseline agreement. Baseline is the minimum requirement to meet the practical needs of the project. It's the budget you can't go below. There's nothing left to eliminate. And while you may establish a baseline range in early conversations, when you develop the proposal, you're going to have a concrete baseline budget. And I suggest you put it there and do not let it be a negotiating point. I can't change the baseline. This is what it takes to do the job. I have negotiating room in other areas, but we need to agree what other areas that you're going to choose. Okay. So minimum requirements is the baseline. If you and the buyer agree on the baseline goals of the scope of work, then you can table the topic. You don't have to bring it back up again. And if you can establish a baseline, it's easier to get paid because the baseline won't change. Okay? If you're waiting for the client to decide on options before they'll sign the proposal, you've written the wrong proposal. But think of all the times a salesperson on your team has said, oh, this job will confirm, but we don't know what they want to do yet. They haven't signed the agreement. They're considering the options. No. 80% of that project or more is going to be needed. Get the client to agree to that. We may not know every option. They may not have decided on every enhancement, okay? But the baseline is not negotiable. And negotiating with yourself is pointless, right? You're going to lose when you negotiate with yourself. Now, if you're new to baseline proposals, you might wonder how to price them. How do you present the budget for a baseline proposal? And it's very simple. If you're tired of line item pricing, then baseline is your friend. Okay. Use a not to exceed number with a baseline scope of work language. Do not have to detail anything. They say, what does that include? You say everything it takes. Okay. I have not decided everything I am going to send. I have decided everything that it is going to do, and we agreed on that. So you should be able to calculate a baseline price on the fly because you're experienced. But if you use the proper selling protocol, you can introduce the baseline budget on your follow-up call number 2 if you couldn't do it in number 1. Number 1 call, you probably deliver range. Number 2, you can probably dial it in a lot closer. Okay. The beauty of all this is that you do baseline literally, and I'm using literally all the time. Every job you do has a baseline. Right? There's a minimum requirement. You could write 10 baseline budgets that will cover 90% of all the jobs you do in a year. You may not have the exact number for each baseline, but you will have the scope of work for each baseline. Baseline audio, baseline lighting, baseline graphics display, okay, baseline speaker support. All the baselines you need, you have. You do them all the time. So baseline is simple scope and one price. Part 2 of the service section of your proposal, you're providing services, is about the impossible enhancements to the baseline. And some of the enhancements may have already been chosen. They may be requirements, okay? And you can present them that way, but they are in addition to the baseline because they are contingent on the baseline being accepted. Without the baseline, you can't buy the enhancement. So, and remember, enhancements can have enhancements, right? So these contingencies, you can't buy the iMag and Record add-on without the baseline, and you cannot buy the streaming without the iMag and Record. These are contingencies. In other words, you have to lay your proposal out logically. Here's the baseline. Here's the enhancement. Here's the enhancement that's is an option because you chose that enhancement, right? Then there are options. The third section of the project scope are true options, okay? Do not itemize options like you would for enhancements, okay? Here's the option to add an extra camera. Here's an option to do this. Here's an option to do that. That's a waste of time. You've got to budget all that stuff. It's not necessary. They're options for a reason. They are not necessary. They would be nice to have. You can treat all of these things and you can say, hey, here are all the things that you mentioned as would be nice to have. All of these things together would add a range of dollars to your budget. And that's all you've got to say. But we'd like more detail on that. Are you changing some of these options to enhancements? Okay. If they're an enhancement, we will pre-incorporate it. But we've already been through this discovery process. We've had conversations about this. You agreed that these things were important. They would be nice to have, and I presented them accordingly. You're not going to get the pushback on this that you think you have. Again, you're negotiating with yourself. Now, in the selling process, you have the third meeting where you present the proposal. You're going to ask some important questions like, how much additional budget would you like to allocate for your enhancements and or for your options, right? Then you say, great, let's find the best way to use that amount. I recommend that if you choose this enhancement, that you also consider this one. It's a little bit more than the budget that you allowed, but it will give you all of these capabilities. Okay. So by the way, options can become a separate project. You do not need to negotiate options in your proposal. It is information. You're sharing information. Matter of fact, it can even come after your pricing summary. Okay. You can have a different decision deadline for options. You can have a different payment schedule for options. You do not need to hold up the entire job while they figure out what they want to do on the options. You don't even have to hold up the job for the enhancements. They can sign the agreement on the baseline only, and you can give them an alternate deadline for the enhancements. If you will sign instead of March 15th, if you'll sign your agreement by March 1, I will give you an extra week to make a decision on your enhancements because that'll allow me to start working on your project and lock everything in, right? So your proposal, when you actually deliver one, will reflect baseline needs, optional enhancements, and then true options, right? Corresponding budgets for the baseline need and enhancements, a budget range on all of the options that they've considered. The buyer has to make a final decision on enhancement options, or at least how much they will choose to spend. But more importantly, they need to agree to terms and conditions. So the last part of proposals that I want to talk about today are terms and conditions, because this is critical. At this point, they probably don't have a lot of information about terms and conditions. They've probably told you some things that their company expects, like our procurement people like to pay in 90 days and things like that. And you can say, and you just move on, right? Your terms will set a deadline on all subsequent decisions the buyers will have to make. And if you have followed these steps, the only negotiating point left are the terms. And here's the conversation. For instance, when citing a range, the most I would recommend you spend is $15,000 to $18,000. This is how you cite a range. Oh, I think that would cost $15,000 to $18,000. No, that's a negative way of presenting it. The positive way of presenting it is the most I would recommend that you spend for this is $15,000 to $18,000. Okay. With that budget, you will get everything you and I have talked about, plus there'll be a ton of capabilities that our expert show team can use to enhance your experience and the outcomes. Okay. There's more behind that budget than meets the eye. Now, wait for their response. Well, okay, that seems like a lot of money. I said, I understand. Of course, your base criteria is only $10,000. Okay? In between $10,000 and the $15,000 to $18,000 I'm recommending, there are a lot of options for any discretionary budget you can add. Oh, okay, well, that makes more sense. Yeah, of course it does. Baseline is the bare minimum. You don't start with the baseline. You show them what the options that they would like to have or think they would like to have are, and then you explain, here's the baseline. How much more money can you pull together? I don't have a solution that meets your needs for less than the baseline. Now, can you tell me a little bit more about your budget? Well, now you're going to get some better information. You see how this works? So don't write a proposal until you have a verbal agreement on the baseline budget. You have reviewed the values of the enhancements and the priorities, and you've removed anything from enhancements that need to become an option or just need to be tabled altogether. And your terms and conditions have to match the project. So spend some time there. Now, a great phrase is, I don't need to make a decision before seeing the completed proposal, but does this sound like it will meet your needs? The point of this question is that you do not move forward without clarity. When the customer says something, you have to restate it. You have to modify the statement of the agreement that is on the table right now. Say, hey, based on what you're saying, it also needs to include this. So our baseline agreement will be this. You need an enhancement that does this, and you need another enhancement that does this. Okay. The other thing we talked about is move to an option. Is that correct? Okay. Don't move forward without clarity. And if you don't get the answers you need, you're going to make them up, and you're going to end up negotiating with yourself, okay, which is a road to failure. Remember, you don't need to write a proposal if the buyer isn't going to buy from you. If they won't agree to move forward, and they want to agree to the things that you've discussed, there's very little chance they're actually going to buy from you, no matter how wonderful your proposal might be. Good selling. Thanks for listening.
If you want to find out more about today's episode, go to trstimson.com/podcast, where you'll find the show notes, related links, and tons of other valuable resources. If you haven't already subscribed to the Intentional Success Podcast, please do so, and I'd greatly appreciate if you would rate and review the show. Also, if you think you might be a good fit to work together or want more information about the Stimson Group, I'd love to hear from you. Visit trstimson.com for more information.